Thank you, Dr. Arvind, for giving me this opportunity to speak on a subject which I probably never spoke on this kind of subject because I've been into more of the clinical work and the innovation. So, but I'll just try to do the fair work on this subject. So, my topic is what, when, and how about the clinical trials. Friends, you know that just Dr. Arvind spoke about the career in research. I think the research, clinical research is an excellent career, but I think it's challenging also. But if you look at the history now, it's been now almost 30 years. We have not been able to bring even a single new antibiotic for the last 30 years. So look at the kind of research which is going on. We do a lot of research, but not the important one. We are not able to bring out a new antibiotic. So I think it's very good career for the youngsters. Like they should get into it and help to improve the life of the people at large, at a global level. So what is clinical research or clinical trial? Clinical trials are the research studies that objectively discover, verify, and compare the results of two or more therapeutic measures. So therapeutic measures could be a drug, it could be a device, it could be a surgical procedure, and it could be a new diagnostic tool also. The most important part is in any clinical research, we tend to understand the disease process in a much better way because we do a lot of studies on these diseases and try new drugs, new devices. So we come to understand more in a much better way to the diseases and which actually brings in a new ways to improve the treatment and improve the quality of the life of the people with the diseases at a larger scale. As I said, like by doing clinical research, we can improve the life of the people at a larger scale. So that is very important part of any clinical research, and this is the most important plus point of any clinical research. This is unlike clinical practice. In clinical practice, like you are looking the disease factor of an individual. You're treating an individual and looking the benefit of that individual per se. But in clinical trial, because clinical trials are designed to move the science forward, because you're moving the science forward and helping to enhance the health of the larger population, as I said in the beginning itself. So this makes a lot of difference in clinical research and clinical practice. Clinical trials are basically a planned experiment which involves the human volunteers. So that is the most important, the volunteers or the human persons, so those who have come for the clinical trials. And the second important thing is you are using the investigational products. The investigational product means where you do not have the overall history of that product in terms of its safety, in terms of its efficacy, and in terms of what kind of result it's going to give us finally, we do not know. So these are the products which is used in any clinical experiment or clinical trial, and that involves the healthcare team, which has to be a very expert healthcare team to conduct the clinical trials. So as I said, the clinical practice has a set pattern of prescription, and you have a certain amount of the expected successful result. You're treating a patient, you're giving a medicine, you're treating him, you're putting him on under observation, and you expect some amount of the successful result. There is almost 70–80% of the successful result. But on the other hand, clinical trials, it's absolutely an investigational pattern. You do not know what kind of success you are going to get. You may get success, you may not get success. Many times you may harm the volunteers, and this makes a lot of difference from the clinical practice. So that is why the ethical issues in clinical trials come into play. Because you're dealing with the human population at large, you're using investigational products, and you do not know the efficacy, safety, and risk of that product, which you are going to use on a human volunteers. So the ethical issues becomes very important in this situation because unless you have the ethical approval or ethical issues, the clinical trials would become injurious to the volunteers. So in that situation, you have to obtain a human research ethical approval. You need to, this should be done during the design of the research approach, like it should be done before you start collecting the data or before you start putting the patients on the trial. You have to take the human research ethical approval from the institution, whichever institution is workable in that particular situation. And the first international code of ethics was laid in Nuremberg Ethical Code in 1947. But not the, why this code was laid, because as I said, the ethical issues are very, very important in any kind of clinical trial or research trial, because we all know about the Nazi experiments in 1940s during the World War II. So a lot of zeals were put on to the very injurious and very injurious trial, and atrocities were conducted on these Nazis, Jews by the Nazis. And secondly, in 1932, the radiation experiments were being conducted. And you also know that in 1940, the Tuskegee syphilis study, because these were the study which were conducted on the human being, human trials, human volunteers, and without putting them on any kind of treatment, they were just being tried on the particular disease or particular experiment was being carried out without getting any approval from the ethical institution, without getting any approval from the volunteers itself. So that is why this Nuremberg Ethical Code was laid down in 1947, which has a very clear-cut definition, like the voluntary. There has to be a voluntary consent is very important from the people, those who are volunteering. The subject should have the ability to freely withdraw it. Like if the subject is not happy, he can very freely withdraw from the trial. The banned injurious experiments were banned in that should be banned. Like you should not do the injurious experiments. The mandatory animal experiments first before you try on the humans. It has to have a scientific validity. There should be a fair subject selection, favorable risk and benefit ratio, like the benefit should go to the subjects, not to the trial. There should be an independent review and respect for all the participants. So these were the important points which were put in the Nuremberg's Ethical Code in 1947. And then later on came up the second International Code of Ethics that was called as a Declaration of Helsinki in 1964. The 1964 Helsinki Declaration included all the 10 points of the Nuremberg's Ethical Code, and it was added with 3 more codes. Like the first one was distinction should be made between the therapeutic research and the non-therapeutic research, and institutional mechanism should be there to ensure that the main ethical principles were followed, and provision of the proxy consent by family members when subject could not consent themselves. So these are the 3 important points which were added in the Helsinki Ethical Code in 1964. And then finally came up the CIOMS in association with the WHO, that is International Ethical Code in 1982. The International Ethical Code stressed on social and scientific value of the research. There has to be a scientific validity of research. There should be a fair subject selection for any research. There should be a favorable risk-benefit ratio to the subject. There should be an independent review, informed consent, and respect for all the participants. So these were the important points which were stressed in International Ethical Code. And we all know that this International Ethical Code came up with the Universal Ethical Code later on, and with the GCP guidelines in 1986. GCP means good clinical practice. Like if you're doing a research, it has to be with a good clinical practice. You have to look at the benefit and the benefit of the participants. So not the industry. You should look the benefit of the participants. Keeping that in mind, the ethics has the 6 core values. It has to be a trustworthiness. There should be a trustworthiness. There should be a respect to the participant. The conductors, the researchers should have the responsibility of all the things which is going on in the research. There should be a fairness in the research. There should be a caring to the participant. and citizenship of the participants. So the cornerstone of the ethical research is the informed consent. Informed consent is a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed of all the aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. So you must make him understand the purpose, the procedure, the benefits, and the risk of that trial, which you are going to conduct on these volunteers or the participants. So you need to make them understand the potential benefits and potential risk of that trial. And after making this, the clinical trial would have the volunteers would have the eligibility criteria, like depending on their specific medical condition, gender, and specific conditions. So you need to, the clinical trial includes the treatment group and the control group. And treatment group is given the standard treatment and the new drug, while the control group is given just the standard treatment, not the control, the medicine. And clinical trial should have the randomization. So that is very important. Like you need to have a computer randomly assigns the patients or the participants to a group, treatment group or the control group. And many times you give the placebo to the control group. The placebo, you all know, is a drug, the material which is given looks like a drug, but it doesn't have a drug inside. And the blinded clinical trial, you all know, if the parties or the researchers or the patients, one of the parties not knowing what kind of drug is given to the control group or the treatment group, and that could be a single blinded or double blinded. If participant is not knowing, then it's a single blind. If researcher and participant both not knowing, then it's a double blind group clinical trial. And if both researchers and the patient, they are not knowing about it, then it's an open label kind of trial. So the strongest study design is a double-blinded, randomized, controlled clinical trial. This will give you a much better result. And I think if I don't have the time, then I will go to the. Do I have 1 or 1.5 minutes?
Yes, sir. Please.
Okay. So as I said, the double-blinded, randomized, controlled clinical trial is the best trial. So we all should focus on this kind of trial. And trial can be a prospective or retrospective. Like prospective means the patients are enrolled for the study before any treatment is given, and the progress of the patient is monitored during the course of the treatment. Retrospective means your past case records and other statistical data are used for analysis. Investigators to rely on the methods employed and data available. So overall, the clinical trials, what a clinical research or clinical trial is, you have a hypothesis, then you generate a protocol for the research, then you have an objective of the protocol, you get into the efficacy outcome, you should know the efficacy outcome, you should know the safety outcome, then you need to take an ethics committee approval, then the consent from the participating patients or the volunteers, and then we reach some conclusion and then generalize the results, so that if the result is positive, then you take the result to the concerned authority, and then it is generalized for the use to all over the patients, all the patients, which would benefit from a treatment point of view or the disease point of view to that particular community or particular kind of disease. And you get to know the effect of the disease, then industry will take it up, advertise, and industry will take. So all these factors will come after this, and the research clinical trial could be completed in this way. So thank you very much. I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.